Subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any mysteries, surprising stories, or tales that defy the impossible. Where are you watching us from? Comment with your city or country. We want to know which corners of the world are listening to our echoes. Every comment helps us create even more engaging and personalized stories for you. Activate the notification bell and become part of our community of explorers of the inexplicable. Here, every echo counts, every story reverberates, and every spectator is part of the mystery. The house stood at the edge of a back road in rural Pennsylvania, where the asphalt crumbled into long cracks and weeds encroached on the shoulder as if to swallow any sign of human passage. There was no sign, number, or mailbox. Just the irregular structure rising behind a rusty fence, with bare concrete walls, glassless windows, and extensions that seemed to have been added without logic. Corridors leading to blank walls, staircases ending at the ceiling, doors that didn't align with anything. The house was never finished, and it was never left unfinished. Daniel Harper pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was unnatural. There were no insects, no wind, or the distant sound of another vehicle. Only the weight of something still, as if the place were holding its breath. Daniel didn't get out immediately. He observed the building for long seconds, his hands still resting on the steering wheel, feeling the familiar pressure in his chest that always arose when he returned there. He had sworn, years before, that he would never set foot on that land again. Daniel wasn't a superstitious man. A structural engineer, known for evaluating unfinished works and condemned properties, he trusted calculations, concrete, and the wear and tear of time. Problems had measurable causes. But that house never fit into that logic. No report explained why the walls developed microcracks that appeared overnight. No study justified why newly built parts seemed to age in weeks, while others remained intact for decades. The official reason for his return was simple. The state had taken possession of the land after the owner's death, and Daniel had been hired to issue a final report: demolition or preservation, a cold, technical, definitive document. The owner, Samuel Grayson, was remembered in the city as a stubborn, almost obsessive man. For 40 years, he worked on the house without ever allowing visitors. He bought materials in small quantities, always paying in cash. He rejected help, refused contractors, and ignored embargo orders. When the municipality tried to intervene, they found impeccable documentation, updated licenses, redesigned and resubmitted plans with minor alterations that circumvented legal requirements. Samuel never finished anything. He just kept going. His death wasn't considered unusual. A heart attack, they said. He was found inside the house, among open bags of cement and old tools. Still, something bothered the investigators. No witness remembered seeing him in recent months, even though the construction had progressed during that time. New walls had been added. A new partial floor had been built. Someone will continue building. Daniel opened the car door, and the cold air hit him hard. The sky was overcast, heavy, with low clouds that made the day darker than it should have been. As he crossed the fence, he felt the uneven ground beneath his feet, parts sunken, others too hard, as if something were buried just below the surface. Each step toward the house brought an uncomfortable feeling of repetition. He had been there before, many years ago, under circumstances he avoided remembering. At the time, Samuel Grayson was still alive, and Daniel had been just a young professional, too curious to refuse an unfamiliar job. The main door was gone. In its place was a crooked opening, with recent marks of dried concrete. Daniel went inside. The interior was darker than it appeared from the outside. The light that filtered through the openings was swallowed up by long corridors and impossible angles. The smell was a mixture of dust, dampness, and something metallic, almost like old blood. The floor had different levels, forcing cautious steps. On some walls, handprints stained with cement remained visible, overlapping one another, as if several people had worked there at the same time, but there were no records of helpers. Daniel began walking, mentally noting details for the report. Even so, he realized he wasn't following a technical method. His eyes were searching for something specific, an error, a flaw, a point of origin. He knew, even without admitting it, that this house hadn't grown by chance. There was a pattern, albeit a distorted one. In a certain corridor, he stopped abruptly. In front of him, a wall that he was absolutely certain hadn't existed years ago. He approached, touched the concrete. It was still cold, as if it had been recently applied. The problem was both simple and impossible at the same time. According to the records, no one had entered the place since Samuel Grayson's death. Daniel took a step back, feeling his stomach clench. For the first time since crossing the fence, a real doubt crept in, not about the structure of the house, but about his own decision to return. Home will never end. And perhaps it was never meant to end. Daniel ventured deeper into the house, following a path that seemed to subtly change every few meters. The initial corridor split in two, but only one allowed complete passage. The other ended abruptly at an uneven wall, as if interrupted mid-decision. The marks on the concrete betrayed haste, not abandonment. Nothing there suggested giving up, only urgency. He took photos, measured the thickness of the walls, noted the angles. Technically, the construction was absurd. Poorly positioned beams supporting loads that should have caused collapse years ago. Yet everything remained standing, not because of balance, because of persistence. The world outside that house seemed distant, almost irrelevant. In the nearest town, a small, aging community marked by abandoned factories, the name Grayson still provoked discomfort. Daniel remembered it. He remembered the averted glances when he asked about the owner, the short, always identical answers. He just wanted to finish the house. But no one could explain why. Samuel Grayson was not a professional architect, engineer, or bricklayer. Before isolating himself there, he had worked for decades as a municipal building inspector in another county. He knew codes, legal loopholes, safety limits. He knew exactly how far he could go without being stopped. This information had always troubled Daniel. Samuel didn't build incorrectly out of ignorance. He chose to make mistakes. In a large room, devoid of full windows, Daniel found something new. An improvised table with old blueprints scattered about, held in place by stones and rusty tools. The paper was yellowed, but the lines were precise. These weren't final plans. They were superimposed versions of the same space, each with slight alterations. Doors shifted a few centimeters. Walls curved where they were once straight. Stairs redrawn repeatedly, as if Samuel were trying to adjust something invisible. Among the papers, Daniel recognized his own signature on an old document, a technical report he had issued years ago, recommending minimal modifications for structural adaptation. At the time, he had believed he was helping an eccentric man complete a personal project. Now he realized that that report had been used as the basis for new distortions. The house was not unaware of external interventions. It reacted to them. Other characters emerged only from traces. A small room contained an old mattress and men's clothing of varying sizes, as if they belonged to different people, none identifiable. In the basement, Daniel found duplicate, triple tools, some visibly newer than they should be. There were no recent purchase records. The absence of people contrasted with the feeling of continuous use. Daniel also noticed something more disturbing. Discrete symbols scratched into beams and wall corners. They weren't occult or religious. They were measurement marks, like those used by engineers to indicate stress and load points, only positioned in places where they didn't make sense. Some were scratched and redone several times, as if someone had tried to correct a calculation that never added up. Local culture helped explain the silence. The region was known for avoiding conflict with authorities, resolving problems internally. When Samuel isolated himself, the neighbors accepted it. When the house grew absurdly large, they ignored it. When metallic sounds were heard at night, no one called the police. Not out of outright fear, but out of a shared feeling that interfering would only make things worse. Daniel felt it now, a collective unease that seemed to permeate the walls. He climbed a narrow staircase that creaked under his weight, despite being recently reinforced. On the incomplete second level, he found a space that did not appear on any known plan, a room with no apparent function, completely closed off except for a narrow opening in the ceiling. The walls were covered with successive layers of concrete, each one slightly different from the last. There, Daniel understood something essential about Samuel Grayson. The house was not a residential project. It wasn't a whim. It was a continuous attempt at correction, a desperate effort to contain something, adjust something, keep something in place, and each mistake required more construction. Samuel wasn't trying to finish the house. I was trying to stop her from finishing something else. Daniel felt an involuntary shiver. For the first time, the question he had avoided since arriving presented itself clearly. What would happen if construction stopped altogether? Daniel decided to establish a systematic route, something that would restore his sense of control. He mentally divided the house into sectors, even knowing that this division did not correspond to any traditional architectural logic. Still, he needed to impose method where everything seemed to resist order. In the first sector, the problem presented itself objectively. New cracks, not the old ones already known and catalogued in previous visits, but recent fissures, as thin as hairs, appearing in walls that had been reinforced less than a month ago, according to official records. Daniel ran his finger over one of them and felt the concrete give way slightly, as if it were too fresh. This wasn't just irregular. It was impossible. As he moved forward, small events began to accumulate. A corridor he had crossed minutes before seemed longer on the return. A door that had previously led to a room now opened onto a descending staircase. Daniel marked landmarks on the floor with chalk, trying to map the space, but soon realized that the marks didn't stay where he left them. Some were blurred, others had simply disappeared. The conflict is no longer just professional. The radio strapped to his belt, used for communication in remote areas, emitted a dry noise. Daniel tried to adjust it, but there was no signal. Still, fragmented voices emerged for brief seconds. Technical words, numbers, structural terms he recognized as parts of old reports. His own voice, recorded years before, echoed, distorted. He slammed the device shut. On the lower level, Daniel found what appeared to be the core of the construction, a dense area of pillars, crossbeams, and overlapping walls, where the space became almost claustrophobic. There, every inch seemed to have been calculated, recalculated, and yet rejected. There were marks of partial demolition, as if Samuel had destroyed and rebuilt the same spot repeatedly. That was the central mistake. Daniel was certain of it. While examining a warped pillar, he heard something that shouldn't exist in an empty building, the rhythmic sound of metal against concrete. It wasn't coming from above or below. It seemed to shift, as if the source were being repositioned as he moved. Daniel didn't call anyone. He didn't shout. He simply moved away slowly, trying to control his breathing. The house responded better to silence, he realized. Any sudden reaction seemed to intensify the feeling of confinement, as if the corridors narrowed on purpose. The conflict intensified when Daniel found a sealed space that was listed in the records as completed. The wall that sealed it had an irregular outline, as if something had been pushed out before it was closed. There were fingernail marks in the internal concrete, hardened by the movement. That was no metaphor. Someone had been alive inside. Daniel tried to rationalize. It could have been an old accident, a poorly documented partial collapse, but the records didn't indicate any fatalities, no complaints, no formal investigation. Still, the evidence was there. Physical, undeniable. He sensed the conflict shifting. It was no longer about deciding the fate of the house. It was about understanding whether demolition, his final recommendation, could trigger something worse. On the second day of the inspection, Daniel realized that the house hadn't remained inactive during his absence. New structures had emerged. An additional wall blocked an access point he had used the previous day. A newly opened gap revealed a staircase that descended deeper than any recorded level. The conflict now had a clear, albeit faceless antagonist, the very logic of construction, fueled by something that reacted to interruption. Whenever Daniel advanced toward a critical point, obstacles arose. Whenever he moved away, the space seemed to reorganize itself. The house did not attack him, she was guiding him. At the end of the day, exhausted, Daniel tried to leave before sunset. He followed the path he believed led to the main exit, but ended up returning to the structural core. The metallic sound reappeared, closer, more insistent. There was no longer any doubt that something was continuously active inside. Daniel stopped in the center of the space and looked around. For the first time, he considered the possibility he had avoided from the start. Samuel Grayson might not have been solely responsible for the construction, and perhaps it wouldn't have been the last. The following morning, Daniel returned home with his notebook, trying to map out patterns. He realized he wasn't alone in his analysis. Small clues of someone or something's recent presence began to appear in places he had already been. Repositioned tools, footprints in damp concrete, scattered paper fragments from plants, but there were no signs of human intruders. Meanwhile, the nearby town was buzzing with silent rumors. Some residents claimed to have seen lights in the windows at night. Others swore they heard voices or footsteps when passing in front of the property. Each isolated account seemed insignificant, but Daniel began to notice a pattern. Each witness pointed to the same area of the house, the structural core he had identified as the heart of the building. The subplot deepened when Daniel discovered an old correspondence from Samuel Grayson. Sealed letters, hidden among old papers, detailed his interactions with engineers, suppliers, and a private consultant whose name never appeared. The messages contained cryptic instructions about structural adjustments and preventive measures against something that threatened the project. The conflict surrounding the house was intertwined with this human mystery. Samuel wasn't simply building to satisfy an obsession. He was trying to protect something, or someone, within walls that could never be finished. While Daniel was investigating, another character began to emerge. Lisa Morton, a resident who had known Samuel since childhood. She was never directly involved with the construction, but she kept vital details. She explained hesitantly that Samuel spoke of things that cannot be left unchecked and of mistakes that return. Lisa claimed to have seen shadows moving between incomplete walls at night, and that Samuel never allowed anyone to get close to the core of the construction. This revelation added layers to the story. It wasn't just about structures and engineering codes. There was something alive in the building, something that reacted to the presence of people and that had shaped Samuel Grayson's life until his death. Daniel also began to notice strange patterns on the upper levels. Objects moved on their own. Doors that had previously opened with difficulty now closed abruptly, blocking passageways. Seemingly trivial elements, loose bricks, bent beams, partially blocked windows, became continuous challenges, forcing Daniel to constantly recalibrate his inspection method. The pressure of time began to take its toll. The weather, previously just a backdrop, now seemed to react. Storms would quickly arise over the property, lightning would illuminate interior corridors, and rain would beat against the unfinished walls. Daniel realized that the house not only physically resisted, but also altered the surrounding environment, as if protecting its core from any disruption. Smaller subplots, such as the relationship with Lisa and the mysteries of Samuel's letters, were directly intertwined with the main conflict. Each discovery increased the tension, revealing new secrets without explaining everything at once. The sense of urgency grew. Daniel needed to understand the logic of the house before a final mistake, his own or the construction's, triggered something irreversible. At the end of the day, sitting in a corner of the main hallway, Daniel felt the house pulse almost imperceptibly. The shadows lengthened, the temperature changed abruptly, and every noise seemed orchestrated. The human and structural subplots converged on a single point. Something inside the house was alive, alert, and demanding action. Daniel realized that simply analyzing or documenting wouldn't be enough. He needed to interact, discover, and decide, and the line between safety and danger narrowed with each step. On the third night, Daniel felt that something had changed irreversibly. The house, which until then had reacted subtly to his presence, now seemed consciously active. Climbing a staircase that had previously led to a narrow corridor, he found what appeared to be a completely new room, impossible to exist in the original plans. The walls curved at surreal angles, the ceiling was higher than any possible projection, and the space seemed to breathe along with him. In the center of the room was an improvised pedestal made of concrete blocks and repurposed beams. On it, a small, old wooden box, sealed with a rusty padlock. Daniel approached cautiously, his heart racing. Each step echoed unevenly, as if the structure itself dictated the pace of his advance. Upon opening the box, he found papers, letters, and photographs. Among them, an old photograph of Samuel Grayson, but not alone. There were shadowy figures around him, impossible to identify, almost out of focus. And, among the papers, a worn, leather-bound diary. The first pages revealed a terrifying secret. Samuel believed that something existed inside the house that could not be released. He wrote about shapes that walk between walls, about eyes that follow every step, and about corrections that should never be interrupted. Even more shocking, Daniel realized that Samuel mentioned names of residents, engineers, and visitors who appeared and disappeared in the city without explanation. Daniel began to feel a presence behind him, but when he turned around, there was no one there. The air was heavy, and an intense chill ran down his spine. His perception shifted. He was no longer inspecting the house as an engineer. He was being evaluated by it. Every decision, every step, every gesture was observed and responded to. The turning point came with a metallic bang. A door he hadn't seen before burst open abruptly. Inside was a staircase leading down to what appeared to be a deep basement. But the air rising from there was hot, laden with an indefinable metallic odor, like old iron mixed with something organic. Daniel descended, each step creaking under his weight. The space seemed infinite, yet simultaneously confined. Impossible walls intersected, and shadows seemed to move independently. At the bottom of the underground corridor, he found something that transformed fear into certainty. A skeleton partially covered by blocks of fresh concrete. Nearby, tools were still warm, as if someone had just finished using them. The revelation hit Daniel with overwhelming force. Samuel Grayson hadn't just built the house, he'd imprisoned something within it, something that continued to move, to grow, to react, something that now knew Daniel was there. He stepped back, but the way out had vanished. What had once been the staircase back now led to a corridor he had never walked down. The house had changed. New walls appeared as he tried to walk. And then he heard the first intelligible voice, coming from a dark corner. "You shouldn't be here." There was no visible figure, only the certainty that something inside the house was awake, conscious, and that with each passing moment its presence became more dangerous. Daniel realized that all his technical knowledge would be useless now. The house didn't need explanations. It needed action, or a victim. The shock of the turning point still reverberated through Daniel's body as he tried to orient himself in the darkness that now dominated the basement of the house. The space seemed to reorganize itself with each step, and the feeling of being watched intensified almost physically. Every sound, the crack of a beam, the distant whisper of the wind, the uneven dripping of water, transformed into a potential threat. He quickly realized that the house reacted not only to human presence, but also to expectation and fear. When he tried to think rationally, corridors stretched out, doors disappeared. When he quickened his pace, the structure seemed to compress to slow him down. Daniel realized that any movement had an immediate consequence, as if the house were alive and calculating his every reaction to test its limits. The human subplots began to converge with the main conflict. Samuel's letters and diaries revealed that people from the town had disappeared without explanation, leaving family members and authorities perplexed. The pattern repeated itself. Curious visitors, engineers, bricklayers, all mysteriously vanished after becoming involved with the construction. Daniel now understood that the local history was not just legend. The house had killed, imprisoned, or at the very least, transformed the reality of those who dared to enter. As he explored the underground corridor, he began to notice recent traces: mud-stained shoes, handprints on the wall, recently handled tools. Nothing that confirmed direct human presence, but evidence that someone or something was active inside. The tension increased as Daniel understood that each of his actions, touching, moving, opening, triggered an immediate reaction from the house. On the upper level, the nearby city still seemed oblivious to the danger. Daniel tried to make contact via radio and telephone, but no communication worked. It was as if the house had isolated them not only physically, but also energetically, preventing any external help. The feeling of confinement intensified. The consequences of the turning point also manifested in Daniel's psyche. Hours of exposure to the house began to alter his perception. Corridors seemed to lengthen and shorten. Doors changed position. Natural light and shadows behaved unpredictably. He realized that the house was testing not only his physical endurance, but also his reasoning ability and sanity. As Daniel cautiously advanced, he found additional records left by Samuel, notes indicating attempts to understand or negotiate with whatever was trapped inside the structure. Some passages were almost delirious, describing impossible conversations, veiled threats, and containment strategies. Samuel knew that the object or entity trapped there could react violently if the rules were broken. Daniel understood the gravity of the situation. He not only faced the structural challenges and distorted logic of the house, but also grappled with an unknown, possibly conscious force that continued to shape the environment and decide who would survive. Every wrong decision could be fatal. Every misstep could be the difference between escaping or becoming yet another victim of the secret that Samuel Grayson never managed to control. Upon realizing this, Daniel finally understood the weight of his mission. It wasn't enough to simply inspect or document. He needed to decipher patterns, understand intentions, and act with extreme caution. The conflict was no longer merely structural. It was a battle for survival itself. And every reaction from the house created immediate consequences, testing physical, psychological, and emotional limits. In the following days, Daniel began to realize that he could no longer rely solely on technical methods or his experience as an engineer. The house demanded something different: attention, intuition, and courage. Each hallway was now a test, each door a decision that could alter its fate. He began recording patterns of sound, light, and movement, trying to anticipate changes before they became threats. The first major test came when he tried to cross the corridor of the structural core, where the walls folded and the underground staircase disappeared and reappeared. Daniel took a deep breath, adjusting his pace to the rhythm of the building itself. He realized he couldn't react with haste or fear. He needed to act with full awareness, studying every detail before moving. What had previously paralyzed him, corridors that changed shape, doors that appeared out of nowhere, became his guide. He learned to read the house as if it were a living organism. The second challenge involved the wooden box found at the turning point. Daniel realized that each previous opening had provoked unpredictable reactions from the house, shifting walls, metallic noises, changes in space. Now, he needed to find the right way to interact without triggering further instability. He spent hours analyzing symbols, plant patterns, and concrete marks, developing his own logic. Each wrong attempt produced subtle consequences, reinforcing the need for precision. During this period, his relationship with Lisa Morton intensified. She began providing valuable information about Samuel Grayson, detailing the behaviors, routines, and containment habits that the former owner maintained. Daniel realized that collaboration was essential. The house responded not only to individual action, but to collective strategy. His growth involved accepting help and recognizing that technical knowledge alone would not be enough to survive. Daniel's transformation also manifested physically. He learned to remain calm under pressure, to control his breathing, to perceive subtle signs of danger. Reactions that were once instinctive, fear, hesitation, impatience, were now modulated by analysis and observation. The house became an adversary that taught him, demanding constant evolution. Another crucial test arose on the upper level, when Daniel encountered a partially demolished wall leading to a completely new room, never before recorded in blueprints. The space was in complete disarray, with crooked beams, fresh concrete, and recent handprints. He understood that the house was actively expanding, rearranging its interior according to his presence. To navigate the space without triggering dangerous reactions, Daniel had to plan each step, each touch, and coordinate his movements with the light filtering through the cracks. Overcoming challenges also involved accepting that absolute control was impossible. Daniel learned to adapt to unexpected changes, to react quickly but strategically, transforming fear into deliberate action. Each completed challenge strengthened his ability to anticipate patterns and stay one step ahead of the hostile environment. At the peak of this phase, Daniel managed to map out a sequence of paths and reactions that allowed him to traverse areas that previously seemed impossible to reach. He evolved from a tense and insecure observer into someone capable of understanding the living dynamics of the house, anticipating movements and reacting with precision. Finally, Daniel realized that his transformation wasn't just physical or mental, it was spiritual. He was beginning to understand Samuel Grayson's logic, the limits imposed by the house, and the need to keep something contained within its walls. Survival depended on continuous growth, absolute focus, and the courage to face what no calculation could predict. As Daniel progressed through the upper and lower levels of the house, he realized he had reached a crucial point. He could no longer explore passively. Every corridor, every door, every wall now carried an immediate response to his presence. He began to identify more complex patterns, not just movements of walls and changes in space, but subtle signs that the house was reacting to his intentions. Lisa Morton became essential at this point. She brought old maps of the city and the terrain, showing neighboring buildings, drainage lines, and old underground tunnels that could explain some anomalies. But Daniel realized that the house wasn't limited to what was visible in the records. There were extensions that Samuel Grayson had kept secret and that now responded almost consciously to his presence. The pressure of time intensified. The surrounding atmosphere worsened drastically. Biting wind swept through the open corridors, thunder illuminated the interior in brief flashes, and the heavy rain made the freshly poured concrete resonate with metallic noises that seemed to converse with Daniel's presence. He realized that every action had an immediate impact, and that time was not merely an external factor, but part of the very test of the house. Daniel began to organize his strategy to reach the central core and confront the force that remained trapped within the structure. Each secondary subplot, Lisa's presence, traces of other visitors, Samuel's letters, connected directly to the build-up to the climax. He needed to fully understand the rules of the environment and the entities that inhabited it, or the risk of failure would be absolute. He mentally reviewed all the observed patterns, the movement of the walls, the metallic sound, the signs of presence, the weak points in the concrete, the corridors that changed direction and height. Every detail was catalogued and tested in small, controlled movements. Daniel knew that any mistake could be fatal, but he also understood that hesitating would be equally dangerous. Tension grew when he realized that some areas of the house were beginning to close in, as if the construction were limiting his escape routes. Each corridor seemed to lead him to a single, centralized point where the final confrontation would be inevitable. The house thus became a kind of conscious labyrinth, designed to guide him to the core of what Samuel Grayson was trying to contain. Daniel mentally prepared himself, gathering all the experience he had acquired, technical knowledge, the household's behavioral patterns, fragmented instructions from Samuel, collaboration with Lisa, and the intuitive understanding that every decision would be evaluated by the environment. He not only needed to survive, he needed to understand and act with surgical precision to avoid triggering forces that were beyond any human logic. The instant he approached the core, the metallic sound became deafening and the space began to vibrate slightly, as if the house itself were breathing in response to him. Each calculated step led to a surge of tension, preparing not only Daniel's body and mind, but also the reader for the story's climax. The stage was set. All subplots resolved or addressed, every element of the main conflict aligned, and Daniel aware that the ultimate confrontation with the essence of the house was inevitable. The setting, the tension, and the stakes were perfectly orchestrated, ready for the moment when all the pieces would fall into place in a surprising and terrifying conclusion. Daniel finally entered the core of the house, the space indicated by all the clues, sounds, and patterns he had followed. It was a large, yet tortuously irregular underground hall. Diagonal beams pierced the ceiling, curved pillars emerged from unexpected points, and partially completed walls formed impossible corridors that folded back on themselves. Each step resonated unpredictably, and the intense metallic sound seemed to come from all corners at once. In the center of the room, on a platform made of fresh concrete and stacked tools, something moved. It wasn't human, nor entirely solid. An amorphous, shadowy, pulsating form that reacted to his approach, adjusting the space around it. Daniel realized for the first time that the house and this entity were one. The building not only contained the force, it was the force. As he approached, he felt the air become dense, almost suffocating, and a physical pressure pushed him back. Each attempt to move forward was met with a shift in the space, doors disappearing, pillars appearing in his path. But this time, Daniel did not hesitate. He applied everything he had learned, precise steps, pattern reading, anticipation of the house's movements. Every action was measured, every gesture calculated, yet intuitive. The entity reacted, attempting to displace the concrete, push beams and block its path. Daniel realized he couldn't confront it directly with brute force. He needed to act as Samuel Grayson had tried, understand, adjust, and coexist temporarily. With steady hands, he began to interact with the elements that supported the entity's form, moving beams and aligning fresh concrete according to the patterns recorded in Samuel's journals. The hall trembled violently, pillars partially shattered, blocks fell, and the metallic sound transformed into distant screams. Daniel maintained his focus, feeling the sweat trickle down his face, his breathing heavy, but each coordinated action lessened the instability. He was shaping the entity, circumventing the very consciousness of the house. In a moment of clarity, Daniel understood what Samuel had been trying to do for decades. Keep the force contained, yet stable, continually correcting any deviation that threatened to escape. Now Daniel had to complete the cycle. With absolute precision, he positioned a final beam, adjusted a critical opening, and blocked the passage that could lead to destruction. The house fell silent for a few seconds, which seemed like an eternity. Then, the metallic sound ceased, the vibrations subsided, and the dark presence receded, confined once more to its core. Daniel fell to his knees, exhausted, feeling the physical and psychological weight of the battle. He knew he hadn't won in the traditional sense. He hadn't defeated the entity, only coexisted with it, understood it, and contained the danger. Looking around, he realized that the space, though still uneven, had stabilized. Doors remained in place, pillars were firm, and the corridors, though winding, allowed passage without active threat. Daniel had survived, but the lesson was clear. The house would continue to live, changing, reacting, testing any new intruder. The moment he took a deep breath and prepared to leave, a final whisper echoed through the hall, almost imperceptible. "You understand, but don't forget. The cycle never ends." Daniel then understood the magnitude of what he had faced. There was no definitive end, only vigilance, understanding, and continuous adaptation. The climax did not bring complete victory, but a temporary and desperately fragile coexistence between man and house, intelligence and construction. After the climax, Daniel cautiously made his way to the upper level, each movement still heavy with the tension of the confrontation. The house, though seemingly stabilized, continued to exhibit small anomalies. Shadows shifted rapidly in the corners, metallic noises echoed softly, and the temperature subtly changed, a reminder that the force within the building was still present, watching. As they emerged onto the ground, the rain stopped and the lightning vanished, as if the atmosphere itself recognized the entity's temporary containment. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air and the smell of damp earth, but the sense of relief was mixed with apprehension. He knew the battle wasn't truly over. The house would continue to change, testing future visitors, reacting to every human presence. Lisa Morton, waiting outside, approached silently. Her eyes conveyed understanding and respect. There was no need for words. Daniel shared with her the key details of the confrontation, explaining that survival depended not on brute force, but on attentiveness, adaptation, and careful strategy. Her presence had been crucial, proving that collaboration was as important as individual skill. The authorities, contacted later, partially accepted the technical documentation that Daniel presented. Reports and records were made, but without complete explanations for the public. The house, officially, remained an unfinished historical building, but any attempt at future exploration would be limited by Daniel's knowledge. He understood that his mission had transcended engineering. He had become the guardian of a secret that defied logic and human understanding. Reflecting on everything that had happened, Daniel realized he had changed profoundly. The fear, anxiety, and sense of helplessness he felt during his first visits had transformed into discipline, heightened perception, and respect for the unknown. He had not only survived, but had grown through the conflict, learning to read invisible patterns, anticipate movements, and understand that some forces could not be defeated, only contained. The surrounding town remained relatively normal, but Daniel knew that the house's history was more complex than any official record or residents' testimony could describe. He became the link between the outside world and the living structure, responsible for maintaining the balance and ensuring that the cycle of containment continued. In the end, the house that never finished remained unfinished, but not destroyed. The tension, the mystery, and the power contained within it would continue to exist, and Daniel understood that his role was not to change the house, but to respect it and learn to survive it. The balance between man and construction, between logic and mystery, had been restored, but only temporarily. Months later, Daniel visited the city less frequently, but remained alert to any sign of activity in the house. Although the structure appeared tranquil to the casual visitor, he knew that the subterranean core remained alive, pulsing silently, always reacting to any presence. Lisa Morton maintained constant contact, helping to monitor small changes and ensuring that no one approached inadvertently. Together they formed a discreet watch, protecting Samuel Grayson's secret and ensuring that the containment loop remained intact. Daniel had changed forever. His experience in the house that never finished had not only tested his skills and courage, but redefined his perception of the impossible. The construction continued, mysterious and imposing, reminding everyone that some mysteries would never be fully solved, and that sometimes survival depended more on adaptation than strength. Even in silence, the house sent a silent warning. Vigilance would continue, and the delicate balance could never be underestimated. If you've been fascinated by the story of the house that never finished, don't keep this secret to yourself. Share this mystery with friends and family and see who would dare to explore the unknown. Leave your theories in the comments about the building's construction, the entity inhabiting the core, or the fate of Daniel and Lisa. Each interpretation adds a new layer to the enigma, and together we can keep the tension and suspense of that unique narrative alive. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow new stories that defy logic, explore mystery, and test the courage of those who dare to unravel the unknown. Every like, comment, and share helps keep these stories alive and brings you closer to the inexplicable.